started. Welcome everybody. I'm David O'Quinn with the Glenn County Board of Commissioners. Glad to be joined today by Mayor Cosby Johnson and the City Commission. On behalf of the Glenn County Commission, appreciate each and every one of you for coming and attending today. And as we look at the different results that have been garnered through this survey, I think it will help us as a community begin to prioritize capital project spending within our community. I think that's beneficial in this day and age as the economic environment continues to change rapidly. Planning is important to make sure that we continue meeting the capital needs of our community and make sure that we do it in a fashion that is responsible to the taxpayers. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Johnson for a brief greeting, then we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll get on our program.
Thank you much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of the County Commission as well. And I want to bring apologies on behalf of Commissioner Martin, Mayor Pro Tem Harris, and Commissioner Roll. As we know, life gets in the way sometimes, but we know that they have done the work to not only look at the survey, but start to dissect it and dissect its meaning. So we want to thank them for their work, even though they could not be here. We also want to say thank you to the groups that were involved in bringing this survey together, along with our partners at the county. I couldn't agree more with Chairman O'Quinn that it's of the utmost importance that we do this kind of work early to make sure we get lists that are representative of what our citizens want, not only in our city, but in our county. And for the last thing, what we do want to say is for the general public that are out there, while we are thankful for the survey, we also know that this isn't the end of collecting the community's sentiments on a myriad of issues, that there's still a lot of work to be done in communities across our city, and whether that is door knocking, which the City Commission has talked about to make sure that we start up in the next couple weeks, rounds of community sentiment meetings in the forms of town hall with the county commissioners have already done in great number. We plan on doing as a city as well. And so there's much more work to be done and a wider net to be cast to make sure that we get all of the opinions necessary to make these kinds of decisions. So we want to say thank you to the county and the work that's going to be done here today.
Thank you. If you all join me for the pledge. On the pledge, I'll lead us in the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, this opportunity to gather as a community, to listen to our citizens, to help make plans for our future. And God, we thank you for your goodness to our community. We pray your hand of blessing would be upon us. Give us wisdom and discernment as we discuss these findings and move forward in the plans that are before us. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I want to take a moment to introduce our program and primarily introduction for Dave Balin, who will be presenting the results today. Dave Balin has been with RRC Associates for over 22 years and currently serves as Director of Consulting Services. RRC is based in Boulder, Colorado. Dave and his colleague Glenn Oglesby have a well-garnered respect among their peers and groups that utilize them for their analytical skills and approach. Both of those are reflected in our survey today and will be discussed in the coming hour. This is Dave's second visit to the Golden Isles, and the quality of the survey he will share with us over the next 30 minutes reflects the much appreciated understanding of our community. Dave has a BA from Yale and an MBA from Duke University. Following Dave's presentation, the floor is open for question and answer from commissioners. Following the presentation later today, if there are any questions for the community sentiment group that helped work with Dave on the survey, we will open those questions up at that time. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that the Community Sentiment Survey Committee, which was formed, included from the county Jason Hagan, Mike Stewart, from CVB Scott McQuaid, from EDA Ryan Moore, Andrew Burrows from the Joint Water and Sewer, Jones Hooks from Jekyll Island Authority, Noel Jensen, who is here on his behalf today, Ralph Staffens from the Chamber of Commerce, Regina McDuffie from the City of Brunswick. The results of the surveys and the outcomes of the discussions held this afternoon will be posted the week of May 23rd on the Brunswick Golden Isles Chamber of Commerce, Glenn County Board of Commissioners, the City of Brunswick, the Glenn County Development Authority, and Forward Brunswick websites. The survey funding was received from the Golden Isles Chamber of Commerce, Golden Isles Convention and Visitor Bureau, Golden Isles Development Authority, the City of Brunswick, Glenn County, and Forward Brunswick. I want to thank each of those entities for coming together and putting this together, which I think we will find here will be very insightful for our community. So Dave, thank you for coming to make this presentation. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's great to see everyone today. Nice meeting some of you. For those I haven't met, I look forward to meeting you soon. My name is Dave Phelan, Director of Consulting Research at RRC and from Boulder, Colorado. Arrived last night, spent this morning exploring a little bit. Some of the places I hadn't been into the Golden Isles area, including the World War II Museum. This morning I got a chance to explore there, as well as out at Fort Frederica. So it's a lovely spot. It's a great change of pace from Colorado, where I live in the mountains, and nice to see you all. So thanks for having me. I'm here to just walk you through the results. If you have a burning question, I'd be happy to take them, or else we can save the questions for the end and discussion. And we'll go through, the results, and then be able to discuss that. There's a little outline here of what the presentation contains, and you obviously have copies of this deck, as well as a summary Word document narrative description of some of the findings. But this is kind of underneath that shared vision statement, some of the intent here to continue to make Glenn County, Brunswick, Golden Isles an excellent place to live, work, and play, and to enhance the quality of life for the people who both live here and visit here and work here. But the purpose of our study here was really to gather information that's going to help measure sentiment in the community around some specific issues, some current usage of facilities, some perceptions of the SPLOST in the way that it functions and how it works, and getting some information from folks that'll help you as you're moving forward in trying to get the SPLOST passed in November. So the survey count was a total of over 1,200 completed surveys, along with about 350 partial surveys, people who started the survey but then abandoned it. So a total of 1,600 where we got at least some information from the respondent. The 1,200 surveys represents a margin of error plus or minus 2.7%. Anytime you get above 800 or 1,000 surveys, you're really starting to get into a pretty small margin of error. And every additional survey beyond that doesn't really add too much to the information. It's sort of like a batting average in baseball, right? Your first month of the season, your batting average might go up and down, but by September, every additional at bat isn't going to move your batting average very much. So 800 to 1,000 surveys is kind of the sweet spot. We have more than 1,200 completed surveys for this. The survey was distributed through a lot of the partners that you mentioned, the city and the county. It was posted on websites. It was available here at the library in hard copy. It was emailed to lists of various people through the community. It was an online survey, except for the paper surveys that we got. We cleaned up the surveys to eliminate any duplicates, to make sure that there wasn't someone trying to stuff the ballot box and submit more than one survey. So the data looks really clean. It's a good sample size, good margin of error. Are there people who were not included in this survey frame? Yes, there were. And we can talk about that. But of the people who responded, we have pretty good confidence that this is where they sit.
Dave, I'm going to ask you to speak up a little bit. It's sometimes hard to hear in the back of the room.
Is this a little better if I hold this up?
Seems to be,
Yeah? All right.
a little bit.
Yeah, you guys have powerful AC down here.
Well, we live down here, that's why you
Yeah.
have powerful AC.
So, yeah, you should come out to Colorado for some natural air conditioning. Yeah, so that's the background. Overall, what we found was most respondents were familiar with SPLOST right off the bat. Almost 90% were at least somewhat familiar with SPLOST. And generally, there was support for a handful of concepts around SPLOST, including that it's a fair way to fund community projects, that it improves local infrastructure, and that it saves local taxpayer money. General level of agreement with those statements. There was more disagreement with things around what SPLOST, whether SPLOST focuses on projects that are important to the individual themselves, and whether SPLOST works in their own best interest. And then the item where we saw the lowest level of agreement or the highest level of disagreement was the statement that SPLOST is budgeted responsibly. And we'll get into more specifics on these as we go along. We asked about a potential oversight committee for SPLOST, and that was the very favorable reaction to SPLOST, an oversight committee. And the idea was that the majority of respondents agreed that a SPLOST oversight committee would improve transparency, how the money's spent, the quality of the projects, and the overall efficiency of getting those projects done. Priorities should be focused on infrastructure and public safety, and we'll get into sort of a laundry list of what those include. And the facilities that residents or survey respondents currently use, public beaches is the top one, and some of the municipal buildings and the judicial buildings are the least frequently used public facilities on the survey. So let's talk quickly about who took the survey. We've got a couple of characteristics here. We've got a few demographics kind of at the end of the report, but this looks at where people live, full-time residents of Brunswick County, whether in Glynn County, Glynn County, not Brunswick, Brunswick or Golden Isles. Glynn County, 96% full-time residents, 4% part-time or seasonal residents. 68% of survey respondents live outside of the city, but within Glynn County. 43% own property outside the city, but in Glynn County. 13% live in the city of Brunswick. 10% own property in the city of Brunswick, and 10% own a business outside of Brunswick, but still in Glynn County, and 5% own a business in the city of Brunswick. So there's a mix of residents of Brunswick and then residents of the county outside of Brunswick. This second graph is a multiple choice, so it adds up to more than 100%. You can be multiple of these categories can apply to you. In terms of your job status, 41% of our survey respondents were kind of traditional workers, work outside their home, they go to work outside of their home. 38% were retirees, so those were the two biggest segments when it comes to their work status. Interestingly, 12% were working remotely or working from home or telecommuting, and that's another segment that obviously has grown since COVID, most likely. People who commute to work people who work outside of Glynn County is only 2%, and just a few other percentages in terms of work status. So when we look at the voting, how the voting patterns of our survey respondents, it was really who you want to be talking to in a survey like this. 91% of survey respondents are currently registered to vote in Glynn County, and of those, 96% said they are 5 out of 5 definitely going to vote in the November election, this coming November. So this is an active group of residents who took our survey. Our sample, just for as a note, this N equals number, this is the number of people who answered the question. So you'll see the sample size varies as we go through because certain people drop out of the survey at some point or they leave a question blank. But that question had almost 1,600 people answer it. In terms of general, just sort of high-level government services and and funding mechanisms, what we see is to what extent do you support public safety and city and county government services in Brunswick and Glynn County. We've got this dark blue is 5 out of 5, definitely support. The light blue is 4 out of 5, support. So if you add the light blue and the dark blue, that's your kind of support level. The gray bars are neutral, neither support nor oppose. And then the orange bars are oppose or don't support. The light orange is don't support, and the darker orange is definitely don't support. So what we see is, strong majorities that are supporting public safety and city and county government services. General funding mechanisms, sales tax is an average of 3.7 out of 5. That's there's the most support for a sales tax as a funding source in general terms. Property tax is next. And then user fees, parking fees, or toll roads, or somewhere where it's being paid for the user, by the user is there's less support for that, but that one's kind of right down the middle. You got about as many people in the orange as you do in the blue, and you got 1 out of 5 people in the gray on that one. So that's just some high level. But let's look at what are the current facilities that people are actually using now. We asked, do you use these facilities daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, or never? And so again, the dark blue is daily, the dark orange is never. When you add them up, county beaches, parks and squares, and multi-use trails and bike paths kind of have a moderate level of usage. Athletic fields, recreational facilities, and government buildings, and another tier down in terms of usage. And then the least used facilities are the boat ramps, marinas, and public water access. The government buildings, city hall, boat ramps, marinas, and public water access, and judicial buildings. A lot of people come to city hall once a year. 66%, 2/3 of them said I go once a year to city hall. So it's not that they never use it, they just don't use it very often. And so this kind of gets at, okay, what are survey respondents currently using in terms of some of these public services? And in general terms, do survey respondents think that, given the size of the population in Glynn County and Brunswick and Golden Isles, do you think that the roads, parks, and other public facilities are adequate to service the region's current population? So this one, we had a slight majority, just over half, 53%, said that the facilities are not currently adequate to meet the population's demands. So we got 39% saying they disagree and 14% strongly disagree. When it comes to, given Glynn County's size, do you think it's better, worse, or about the same as what you would expect when you think of similar facilities in comparable communities? That one was, a little more moderate, but still 45% said that it was right down the middle, this gray bar. 45%, it's about what I would expect. It's neither better nor worse. But you had slightly more people saying it's worse than the people saying it's better. So that one is interesting. You're kind of meeting the needs given the size of Glynn County and given what you might expect. But it seems like, people are saying you could be doing better. So let's talk specifically about SPLOST. The next section of the survey talked about SPLOST specifically. Like I said at the beginning, 89% were at least somewhat familiar or very familiar with SPLOST. In fact, more were very familiar, almost half, 49%, than somewhat familiar. So a pretty knowledgeable group of folks, at least to some degree, about SPLOST, what it is, what it's used for, how it's collected. What are some things, some general sentiment around SPLOST itself? I covered these briefly in the intro. It's a fair way to fund community projects, 3.7 out of 5, the highest agreement with that statement. It's a fair way to fund community projects. Then you've got two others here that are pretty similar in terms of their feedback. I think it improves the community's infrastructure, and I think it saves money for the taxpayers. About 1 in 5 strongly agree, about 1/3 agree with those two. Then you drop down a little bit. Another tier down here, not as much agreement, more disagreement with, it focuses on projects that are important to me. I have confidence it's working in my best interest, and I think it's budgeted responsibly. That's the lowest rated one. So that's something that is, people, maybe something you want to think about. How can we communicate with our citizens to ensure that the budgeting process is going to be fair and responsible? So we asked about an oversight committee. Do you think having an oversight committee for SPLOST would improve the transparency of future projects? That one got the most agreement, 4 out of 5, and an average, 36% giving it a 5 out of 5 on the 5-point scale. And then these other 3 were all fairly similar in terms of the feedback. More agreement than disagreement. SPLOST would save money on future projects. It would improve the quality of future projects, and it would make future projects more efficient. So there's a lot of support for an oversight committee when it comes to SPLOST. And all of these people agree that an oversight committee would help. When we got to specific types of improvements that SPLOST could be used for, and we asked on a 1 to 5 scale, how important are these areas that SPLOST could be spent on to you? Our storm drainage, water sewer, and road paving, these infrastructure improvements were really the top, followed very, very closely, really, by police and community safety and fire and rescue safety. You see these dark blue bars here, 50% or more of those top 5 strongly agreed, or strongly said it was strongly important to them that SPLOST be used for those kinds of projects. And then you see down here the government buildings and building a juvenile justice center, not as much importance there. And then when we ask people to say, okay, well, what would be your single one, if you could only vote for one, where would you spend your money? Pretty close between road paving, and road paving wasn't the first on the prior list. Road paving was number 3 here, but it's number 1 when they can only pick one at 17%, and then very closely behind it, number 2, police and community safety at 16%. And then pretty close after that, water and sewer improvements, fire and rescue at 10%, storm drainage at 8%, bike walking trails 7%. And you can see down the list, this rank order if you can only pick one. But we also gave them a chance to pick a number 2 and a number 3. So when we add in the 2 and the 3 to this, the orange bars are what we just saw with the number 1 on the prior slide. But when we add in number 2 in the blue and number 3 in the red, in the green. I'm not colorblind. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You see pretty much the same order of the priorities. Road and traffic improvements still number 1, even when you add in number 2 and 3. Police and community safety, water and sewer improvements, storm drainage projects, fire and rescue safety, then on down the list. So pretty consistent feedback. I believe this is pretty consistent with some feedback from some other surveys that have been done in the past. And I feel like that level of consistency really gives you a message that this is what people are most interested in. And this is where, if SPLOST can be prioritized in these ways, then people are going to be more supportive of it. So like we always do, we try to give people a chance to tell us in their own words, in a qualitative way, what else would you like to tell us about SPLOST? Is there anything we missed on the survey? Is there anything else you wanted to tell us about? There's a lot of different comments. We had obviously over 1,000 surveys, so a lot of good comments. When it comes to this, the Citizen Oversight Committee really rated highly, but a lot of people mentioned that they really wanted the right people on that oversight committee, people who are trusted and people they know will do a good job. So that was one thing we found. Traffic flow on St. Simons Island was a big one. The transparency, whether projects can be finished, and the efficiency of those projects. And so the project-specific comments we got in these comments as well. So just to wrap up with a couple of final demographics of the respondent pool that we saw, definitely a little bit older responses from older folks, 65 and older was 45% of the survey responses. I think the county as a whole, it's like 28%. And so skews a little older. Male, female is a little bit more female than male, but generally not too much of a skew one way or the other there. And then when we look at race and ethnicity, we have 92% of the survey respondents were white, 5% were black or African American, and then small percentages of the other categories. And then when it comes to the household status, you have 26% have children living at home, and then basically the other 3/4 are households without children at home, most of which are what we call empty nesters, children no longer at home. But we've also got couples without children and singles without children at the top of the list there. So those are the demographics of who we talk to. But overall, I think it's a really good starting point for you all, some great information for you to work with, and I'd be happy to take questions or discussion.
This time, are there any questions from commissioners on the Glenn County or city side?
I probably have several questions, so if anybody else wants to jump in, go away. The first question I have is, in your work that you do naturally, do general words that we have used inside of this survey, do they naturally hold well, no matter what you do? So the reason I think about that is a word like oversight. Oversight is something that is generally put in the public. It's the connotation of the word is positive itself. And so when you put it out, does it just naturally push people in a positive direction?
Hard to say whether if you used a different word, it would have gotten a different result, if that's kind of what I'm hearing you ask, but
I guess what I'm trying to get to is to make sure that we gave, I guess, respondents a full understanding to choose something. Because if someone said to choose between oversight and no oversight, then the person would more times choose oversight. So if there was, I guess I'm trying to flesh that out.
yeah, it's a good question. We design and the wording of surveys and the way questions are asked and the sequence of questions are all really important when it comes to questionnaire design. And that's what our firm does a lot of, and we're kind of good at it, I think. But there's no perfect way necessarily. There's pros and cons to asking a certain question in a certain way or a different question in a different way. But to your point, I don't think it would have, I don't think the words, I think we use the right words.
Do you feel as if any of the responses show an oversampling of the population here? And I saw the breakdown of race, so that was pretty obvious there. But
Sure.
were there any other things that highlighted maybe an oversampling where you could almost narrow down and say probably median income of the person we're talking to is this, probably median education would be probably in this ballpark?
Yeah, well, we didn't ask those two questions purposefully, because we just thought it's not relevant. We don't want to be too intrusive or too, asking people to answer sensitive questions. Because we went through like, do we really need this question or not in the design process? But yes, younger people were not as represented. African American people were not as represented. The way this was not a stratified random sample process. It was a sampling of convenience, which is to say, you put a survey out, you advertise it, but whoever stands up to take it can take it. We didn't go door to door knocking and actively reaching out. Would you please take our survey? We used the resources we had. So certainly there are. I think one of the things we want to dig into is, can we slice off, say, the people who are younger, who did take the survey? Was their feedback different from older people, for example? So we would like to dig into those, or people who are working in the workforce versus retirees. Could, is there going to be a difference? I'm not sure yet. My sense is there's probably not going to be a big difference, but we should confirm that.
David, when you're looking at these, your demographic breakdown was in response to the survey returns.
Survey respondents.
And I would ask the chamber or maybe economic development, what is the population breakdown? And can we do an overlay on that to this response so that we get an idea? Because obviously the majority of the respondents are 55 or older in this, in the survey responses. So they actually wouldn't use parks and recreation, ball fields, obviously wouldn't be as important to them as some of the other things. So how do we get that overlay laid back into these demographics so we can get a better feel as to maybe expand that to a broader sample?
Exactly.
Is that something that the chamber can give us?
We talked about that with family, people of family down since it was 40-something%. It's a big chunk of the 1,600s. We'll have a statistical breakdown of what young families want as well. We can pull some of that out, but average age, I think we looked up earlier, is 42 in Lee County. So it's definitely skewed a little older than our median age.
And my other question is when it gets down to juvenile services and government buildings, we're a population of about 85,000, and thankfully, more than 80,000 would never use our court system.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank goodness we live in a peaceful community, but it doesn't change the fact that if our court systems are overtaxed with crowdedness or whatever, that we need to address that. How do we plug any of that formula into the statistical results that we've gotten? Because I don't ever, and I hope to never need any of the court system here. But for those that are in it, it's important.
Yeah, I mean, we're asking people, and they're going to tell you, these are the things I do and I like, and I want you to spend the money here. Like you, hopefully they never are in the court system, and so this is a popularity contest, right? And the court system and the Juvenile Justice Center aren't going to win in a popularity contest. So it's a function of what you need versus what your citizens want. And that's for you guys to kind of figure that out.
Well, I think the challenge becomes is very few people use the paint building. But I wonder what the community would do without the paint building if it didn't exist. So,
We also have a legal mandate to provide those services. They're not things that the county can just make an election and say, well, people don't want this. We're not
So then
going to courts anymore. We have to do that.
and the same thing pertains to City Hall. I mean, who cares about City Hall? But how would you like to make it without it?
So to me, it seems like this should be called sentiments of a section of the community, not the community sentiment survey. How did you all go about getting respondents to the survey? I mean, I know we got a lot of survey emails from Don.
Yeah.
But was he the only person doing outreach? How did you all go about? Because my district is heavily African American, but it's not really represented in this. So this is useless to me. And young people. I have a bunch of young folks in my district, and so if you say you all do this very well, did you all not, how do you do outreach to make sure that these groups were represented better in this?
Yeah, this was really just an initial, reach out to with the resources we have in terms of community websites, city, county websites, email lists. It was an electronic only survey. So we were using, the resources we had as a first step to kind of high level see, temperature check, how's the community feeling. The full-on outreach deep into the community was not part of our scope. So we used the resources we had, we used the access to the electronic survey, we had the survey here as well.
So again,
But we're missing the
yeah,
people
this
you're
is
talking
not a
about.
community sentiment survey.
Well, to this point, what makes the 800 to 1,000 the optimal survey level? And I guess my question is also, how is this validated when certain groups are clearly underrepresented?
So the 800 to 1,000 is roughly where you cross the threshold of a plus or minus 3.5% percentage points and a margin of error. And the 3.5 plus or minus margin of error is generally, although some people could argue one way or the other, that's generally the threshold you want to be over or under for a margin of error. You want your margin of error 3.5 percentage points or less. And this is 2.7%. So it's just a calculation statistically.
So it doesn't matter about the population of the community per se, it's just going for that 3.5%.
Correct. It's, when you have a very large population, you don't need to go to talk to every single person. You just need a sample. It's kind of like if you're cooking a big pot of soup and you put all your ingredients in and you simmer it and you take a few tastes. You don't need to eat the entire pot of soup to know how it tastes. You just need to sample it. You need to sample. So this is a sampling of residents. It undersampled certain communities. It oversampled others. But when we have 1,200 surveys, we're starting to feel like we're starting to hear some things that we have some confidence in. And for you all, I mean, you're looking at voters, which is a subset of the total population of Glynn County is the likely voters. And I know we can find the demographics of Glynn County. I'm not sure we have demographics of likely voters, but we want to be as inclusive as we can. But yes, there were, and we do this a lot of communities, it's hard to reach young people, to get them to participate, to get them to take surveys, come to meetings, show up, give their input, give their feedback. So it's not unusual to skew old, but given what we heard, I think this is really valuable information.
Do you, I guess, yeah, can I ask a follow-up on that? Just, I think Mr. Myers had some of the information in his email when he sent it out today. So I know that the chamber was responsible for a lot of the surveys that went out. But I thought I saw something in Mr. Myers' email this morning that 17% of the surveys that were actually taken were a result of the cities actually posting the survey. Is that correct? Correct. And then what was the other? It was chamber, the city, and what was the third? Give me a moment.
Yeah.
A quick question while he finds it, and was the charge at the beginning to sample a voting population? Or, because I think statistically I agree, right? If you're gonna go voters, it's gonna skew white. It's gonna skew older.
Yeah.
If you were trying to say on the basis of trying to capture the community
As a
then-
whole. Mhm.
as a whole, then you would try to get close to the number to be represented. And so I guess that one question, if the charge was we are trying to poll likely voters, we're getting a sampling of that at least. But I didn't know if that was the actual charge.
That was more or less when we discussed the pros and cons of different ways to distribute the survey and who are we really trying to reach.
Yep.
It was voters. We're not trying to reach second homeowners who don't vote here. We're not trying to reach people who do live here but don't really vote. We're trying to reach people, the voting population.
But not
So-
propensity voters, just a voting eligible person.
Or a likely voter is really what you want. Just because you're registered to vote.
Yep, we're looking for
And a likely voter, a subset of all voters are likely voters. We were really trying to get likely voters, yeah?
And then the follow-up, quick other question. Were there any other common themes that you seen repeated? I've seen a couple of these, and I don't know if these comments were, I'm assuming to get here, they were mentioned more than once.
Yeah, the bigger the word in the word cloud, the more times that individual word was mentioned. It's kind of dominated by SSI, but, yeah, so that's probably, it could be, traffic on and off the island, I mean, but probably that was some people who live on St. Thomas Island. But the size of the word correlates with how many times it got mentioned. Yeah.
Got it. And so whether you kind of contacted the survey through the Brunswick website or Chambers or anybody else, they were mentioning kind of same sign as well, so thematic.
Right, right. And, I think that really came, in the narrative on the left side of that page there, talks about it's a new causeway or more traffic on and off St. Simons. So it doesn't mean the person lives on St. Simons, but they might, that it was related to traffic on St. Simons Island or access on and off St. Simons Island.
And in smaller communities such as ours, and I'm just wondering the reasoning of separating out the three. Oftentimes green space, trails, and recreation live all in the same ecosystem.
Sure.
So, a lot of our trails may cut through Howard Coffin or, North Glen or whatnot. Does it help when those things are combined, that people view that as an entirety of one ecosystem versus, well, now I got to choose between whether I'm on a baseball field or a trail?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the more granular you get on the questions, we find, sort of grouping them thematically is sort of gives more people a chance to say, yeah, I support that. And these were, intended to be kind of general buckets. We weren't trying to necessarily talk about super specific facilities. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. I guess I'm trying to figure out, was there a specific reason at the beginning of separating those out?
Oh, okay.
Instead of kind of grouping them as one. Whereas a smaller community, I think, what I'm trying to say is the person who wants bikes and trails really wants a better Howard Coffin Park. They just are having to choose between those two. And so was there a reason in splitting those up to get granular or
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on the questionnaire design with help from all the people who live here, because I can't always know how to break things apart. So I don't remember who or why it was separated like that. But you're right, those user groups, we do a lot of work where the dog park is like the big thing, and the dog owners all try to get in there, or the disc golf course, and you got these little passionate but very small groups of people, and you don't want to give them too much of a voice. You want their feedback, but so the way you phrase things and how granular you get does make a difference.
Cap, did you have something?
A lot of thoughts before.
It's a lot to digest. Yeah.
Question, within the subgroups that you have listed, such as, the 65 to 74 group, the 55 to 60, did you do any analysis within those groups to see if any of those particular groups were different than the others? Am I fairly clear on what I'm trying to ask?
No,
Maybe younger voters rank
Yeah.
parks higher than drainage. Did you see that when you looked at the different groups?
We haven't segmented the data yet. That was part of the intent of getting feedback from y'all. So what groups would you like to see segmented and isolated? And the nice thing about having 1,200 surveys is you can break it up into smaller groups. And yes, you're confident, your margin of error does increase when you slice it up into a group of, say there's 400 responses in a group that you want to profile, but 400 responses is better than 100 responses. So starting with 1,200 surveys is a good good starting point to be able to segment. So yeah, this morning we brainstormed a little bit some of those segments, but age, certain of the age groups we can break down. Certain of the age groups are too small to be able to look at, but age would be one way to look at it. If there are other thoughts about ways to drill into the data a little more, I'd be happy to look into it.
Excuse me, what can you tell us about the lowest rated cinema here being the budget is responsibility? Only 21%.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, that's showing you, people didn't think that.
Not real good.
I mean, every challenge is an opportunity, so it's an opportunity for y'all to gain the trust of the community and communicate with your residents that you have a plan and these are your priorities and this is what we're spending the money on and then follow through on it, spend the money on what you said you were going to spend it on.
Reporting thing perhaps could take place, about budget?
Yeah.
Is it starting off the budget is bad? Is it during the process or at the end of the project?
I mean, we heard that some projects just took a long time, or they never got finished, or they never got started in the first place. So I think it's kind of all of the above. Yeah.
One of the things about that is folks do not realize how long it takes once you start the process. And I think that's the educational piece here. Is that they really need to understand that there's not a lot of money over here until it comes.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you like Old City Hall down here, when Old City Hall was redone, and it took several years to get that project off the ground. There was no money. And it depends on how the funding comes in also. I mean, you have to weigh all of this stuff. So there's no wonder that this is the lowest priority here because this is so much good for that.
Right.
How do you get to all this stuff? The community that's asked to vote for this has never been educated really to the process. That's really what this overlying thing tells us. And that's where the effort is being expended is to educate the process, just like everything else. But this is unbelievable. This shows what it probably is. The sticking point for this thing, 21% makes this a budget. But what's the real connotation of all this stuff that's going into budget? Nobody really knows. That's where we need to straighten it out, right there. Let folks know what the process is and how long it takes. I can tell you something else about Old City Hall. That if you hadn't had a bunch of good folks down there, we had a committee for Old City Hall. It was done by committee. They were very involved. Right down to the historic features that were supposed to be in that building, right down to the dollars and cents that were spent on that project down there. And, but this, again, you can't start the project until the funding is there. It's got to be there. And you're getting ready, another problem here, is your interest rates are getting ready to pop up. Just like the Neil over here says over here, he can build if he can get nails. And you're gonna run right straight slap into the same stuff with this block. It's gonna be the same problem. It's gonna be permeated into the community. Interest rates are not going down. Inflation is not going away. It's not temporary. There's a little bit of difference in it. We're not as industrialized as we were back in the 70s. We're a service economy. But this thing about the budget, it is something that can be handled. It really can. It's just called education. Folks out here, we want to support this. And so it's the best way to raise money in the community. But it's up to all of us to get together and be sure. Just like I say in Old City Hall, we have status support. We need right where that thing's doing every minute, all the way through the
Yeah.
We're not quite as into things back in the early 2000s as they are today. And thank goodness for everybody that's interested and everybody that's in this room today, because it's awfully important that we all vote well. All the community spirit in doing this survey is spot on. It's very necessary.
Yeah. Good.
My commissioners, Commissioner Neal, Tostenson, Booker, any questions, further questions, any thoughts?
Well, I just have concern that, this says community center, and it doesn't represent my community very well. I think the key votes were young people, young African Americans that voted against this last time. So I don't know how they're going to feel when they see community sentiment and they don't see themselves represented in this. And and I know, maybe you had just a limited budget to do your outreach. You say you still haven't looked at some of the data. But I'm just not certain. This seems to be, I guess, overall positive for the group that responded, I guess. But there's still some questions. And 17% that, what is that, 200 people from the city that, I think that the city manager, the county manager was talking about that Don just got a report from. That's not a lot of people. So, maybe it's enough to, statistically to get some data, some credible data from, but I'm not certain how this is going to go over, I guess is my concern.
Yeah, I hear you.
And maybe you needed more money for a bigger budget to do something. So.
I think, Commissioner Booker, that, this is a tool that we'll use as groups to help formulate lists that we can put before the public. It is one tool of many. You have also, we value your opinion and the opinion of the city, and want to be sure that we're recognizing needs, some that may have not have been clearly identified during this process. But this is just one tool in the toolbox to developing a list. I do think it's important when you start looking at the number of respondents who are likely voters or going to vote being the high number, we certainly should consider that. But I think as we formulate the list, we certainly should consider all aspects and all concerns that are in our community, and we'll certainly make sure that we capture that as we get our list together. Anyone from down here that have any comments?
One thing I think that rings loud and clear is a $25 million courthouse expansion is not going to be, is toast. So, I think is,
that's for you guys
that
to.
is loud and clear.
If you listen to what people are prioritizing in terms of SPLOST, that's not one of their priorities.
Well, there was some question at one time, but there's not anymore.
Yeah.
Well, if that, let's go ahead.
Yep, a couple things. I've had the privilege to sit on two successful SPLOST, as my esteemed city councilor was speaking of there, and I've been part of one coming on this commission with failure. And I think this is a good beginning of a conversation that the community needs to be having, that we want to have as commissioners. When you have 1,200 respondents out of citizens of 85,000 people, and you have people coming in of an untold number into the county that are using the facilities. I just use the example, as you hear me say repeatedly, when I'm sitting there at the marina at 7:30 in the morning and traffic is backed up over McKay River Bridge and going further down the causeway, that tells you there's some traffic there. But with that, just a couple things, talk about juvenile courts, and that it's toast. I want to say...
Juvenile court was toast, that was $25 million.
Right, I agree with that. But there's a lot of juveniles front and center in the discussions right now, and not just the existing facility, but future. But I want to remind our community that juvenile court is an option that we as a community embrace. Been hearing a lot of negative things about that. Juvenile court provides this community a privilege to deal with its truant activities. And if we did not have a local juvenile court, which Glenn County is one of the few in the state does, all of these kids that come into that court and need that court are going to be in YDC, in the state, out of town, and out of reach. For me, I'm a big supporter of juvenile court because if I had a daughter or a child or a nephew or a niece that got into trouble, I would want local people having the opportunity and local partnerships to show them a better way. We did a criminal justice study when we were dealing back with the jail before. And it showed and spoke one word real clear, that people that come into juvenile court and YDC, if you're not able to turn them, then they're going to stay in the criminal justice system. They're going to wind up in state court. They're going to want out of there, and that's well documented. I'm sure that our new manager here is counterpart of former number 2 guy at Fletzy can verify a lot of statistics. So I don't want this community to throw away the need in consideration for a juvenile court. Another thing is that we live in a very blessed county. It's a very diverse county, and we can't lose sight of that. I served as at-large before, but I serve on the island now where District 2 is my focus. And you have, between Sea Island and St. Simons, you have a distinct tax base and residents now that are entirely different from 20 years ago. And they pay a large share of the taxes. But irregardless of that, their demographics are different. There are people that are not getting out cutting their yards, taking care of their maintenance. There are people that are buying houses over there. You have in the city, a city that has been fighting for a decline of population, and every group that comes together, including this mayor and manager, commissioners, John, are hoping for great and better things. And you can feel that reaching that epicenter for things to happen once again in our community. And the community, within that community, needs to be heard well. And I don't know that these demographics reflect the concerns and support that they want to see the city have. And I just say it's same on rural out there in District 5 and Tosson's district and at-large commissioners. You've got a whole different community out there. You've got the interstate. You've got the future of the ports. If you've been missing the news, the ports are going to be growing with a lot of investment. That's going to change a lot of demographics. And we know that in that, you got to have laborers and you got to have housing for people. So we're going to have job opportunities, but are we going to have the infrastructure and the housing to fulfill what the state is about to continue to invest? So this is a good start, but it's definitely not the end of fact-finding and researching and listening that we need to be doing. And the message that's in here is not a one-for-all message at this time. And I just encourage the public to embrace it is a start of conversation, but this is not the final message that needs to be brought forward.
Mr. Fallon, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what I was talking about before, and it was actually from your one-pager that you put out. So just, it was simply where the responses came from, and so 39% of the responses were a result of the general link, but 35% was a result of the city's link, which is commendable. That's a great marketing result that you had, and then 17% from the chamber. So 91% of the responses came from those three sources.
Ms. McDuffie, anything you'd like to say?
Hey, I want to thank whoever uses this picture up here of our Brunswick, what used to be our boat marine. The city of Brunswick actually had its own boat marine right there with a dock. People actually used it, and let me tell you, if it was back the way it could be, the pier that's out there right now, you couldn't have that pier because people were actually water skiing out there. And they were even on Sunday afternoons here having hydroplane races right out there where the folks here today go by there on low tide and you can play soccer out there on those that's been allowed to fill it in. And to just be the way it is out there instead of looking like this all the time. And I can't help but sit here and reflect on it. I actually used to jump in at probably 10, 11, 12 years old, and there was the most beautiful beach over where it's marsh grass over there now. And I look at the city of Brunswick like that all over, and I know that we can have this as a recreation facility again if we all get together and pull Brunswick together in the right way. I'm probably the person in here that might have the greatest age. I don't know, so I apologize if you're not interested. I hope you are. I see a great Brunswick. It has a foundation right out there. It needs to come back. We need a boat marina back out there. We need so much here. But it takes vision, and it takes more to do it. So hopefully this will be a start for us to have a spot.
Mr. Mayor, any final comments before we end up?
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for convening this and bringing us together today. Thank you for the work that you all put in. I know working with assistants can be hard and to get granular is even more difficult, so thank you for being with us today. I want to echo the sentiments of Commissioner Fendig and Commissioner Booker as well. And I know, I say when Mayor Pro Tem Harris, who spoke to me a little bit about this, as well as Commissioner Roll, know that there is still work to be done to cast a wider net, to make sure that we bring in the sentiments of the entire community. I definitely agree with you, Chairman. This is a tool in our toolbox that we can look at as information, but we know there's a great deal of work to be done to make sure that we reach every demographic in our community and make sure that they're all on the table when this is done. But for the work that has been done for each of the commissioners, for our county manager, our city manager, and my commission, we just say thank you.
Mayor, always good to be with the city and the commissioners. And, I think it's important for us, for all of us, as we look at the time frame on this. We do have a lot of work, but it's time to get to work. And it's incumbent upon us as commissioners to continue to take this information, other tools that we've been given, start digesting, putting together a list, and talking to people within our communities to make sure that we clearly understand that their sentiments are reflective of this information. If there's something new that needs to be brought to the table, we ought to be able to bring it. But the facts are, we're at the time that the work needs to be done now. And so at this time, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for coming, and appreciate it very much.